This screen. The first freaking screen I've ever seen on a Nintendo system. You see, I was born in a Sega family, and we used to play games like Afterburner and whatnot, and it was a lot of fun. But after this game, my room, well, turned into this. Yeah. Welcome to Nintendo 101, where we'll be going over the history of Pokemon Red and Blue. So this game originated in 1990 with a proposal from Satoshi Tajiri, an aspiring game designer who founded a company called Game Freak with two other friends. Believe it or not, Satoshi's autistic, but Nintendo hired him for his sheer creativity. I mean, the dude won like game design rewards out of the wazoo. Anyway, his idea was a game called Capsule Monsters, which was inspired by bug collecting and capturing monsters in gashapons, or as we know, capsule toys. Since, of course, the concept was weird, it was rejected several times. But when Satoshi befriended Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, Zelda, and many other Nintendo titles, the project was greenlighted and spent the next 6 years mentoring Satoshi. And with that, Pokemon Red and Green were born. But what made this game so popular? Why did it go out to spawn a million spin-offs, merchandise, a trading card game, and an anime that spanned over 700 episodes? Well, let's look back and see what the game was all about. So in this game, you're a 10-year-old boy, about to go on his Pokemon journey with the assistance of Professor Oak, a famed researcher in the region Kanto. If you didn't know, Kanto is actually a region in Japan. The point of the game is to defeat all 8 gym leaders, and travel to Indigo Plateau to beat the Elite Four, and become the champion, the best trainer in the whole world. But you're not doing this adventure alone. Your neighbor, Professor Oak's grandson, has been rivals with you since you were babies. Man, whatever you guys fought about at infancy is beyond me. In fact, your first Pokemon battle is with this guy, and he chooses the Pokemon you're weak against. This character was always made to seem like he was always ahead of you, whether capturing more Pokemon, having more badges, etc, etc. And it gave you an incentive to keep going. And take a guess who the final boss is. Yeah, you get the drift. Sure makes you feel good when you pummel him to dust. But of course, to get to that point, you have a good 30 hours ahead of you, which I must admit is ridiculously addicting. After your first fight with your rival, you enter tall grass where you find wild Pokemon. This was a really cool idea, since the game pretty much warns you when you could hit wild encounters, which most JRPG fans, like me, find really annoying. Now when you're in battle, you notice you can have up to 4 moves, and some do damage to the enemy, while others mess with stats. This must have been a huge risk for Nintendo, because most RPGs give you a slew of attacks and spells at your arsenal. Nintendo Power actually gave this game a 7.2 for this exact reason, stating that the game got too shallow. But for most of us, the system worked perfectly, and after a while you start to learn that there are different types of moves you can use, 15 to be exact, and each of them do more or less damage depending on the type of Pokemon that you're facing. Some attacks even do damage and stat changes at the same time. Now that's pretty cool in itself. But the Pokemon are really the star of the show here. There's over 150 to catch, and most of them are pretty darn adorable. Most. This is what made the game really awesome, the fact that you could catch and train everything you find in random encounters. Of course, getting them can sometimes be a pain in the ass. It gives you a feeling of accomplishment when you finally get them. When you do capture a Pokemon, its data gets put into the Pokédex, an interactive encyclopedia that Oak gives you. It tells you the habits of these Pokemon, which are meant to stimulate your imagination. It'll definitely give you a more emotional bond to your critters, especially since you can only have 6 with you at a time. The rest of them will be put in boxes. Yeah, that must be pretty depressing, huh? So you'll quickly notice that leveling up your guys using wild encounters doesn't work very well, unlike most RPGs. And that's where trainers come in. Some of these trainers battle for fun, some train in gyms, and some even train to be the champion, just like you. Lots of battles also leads to leveling up, where you can learn new moves in exchange for old ones and even make your Pokemon evolve. Since this usually makes the Pokemon look more awesome and their stats increase, the game actually makes level grinding somewhat fun. Come on, that's an accomplishment in itself. Alright, on to the towns. Even the towns are different than most RPGs. There's shops where you can buy items such as status healers, Pokeballs, or repellents, a Pokemon Center where a nurse heals your Pokemon for free, not like ints from RPGs, ugh. And Pokemon gyms where you fight the gym leaders to get all 8 badges. But let's back up the gyms for a moment. These guys are pretty much the boss battles in the game, where each person uses the same type of Pokemon. Since this game is all about rock, paper, scissors, you need to find a Pokemon strong against the leader, which is usually conveniently placed next to the town. Not to mention beating the gyms get you really cool stuff, stat bonuses, traded Pokemon that could obey you, and they'll even give you TMs. Let's go more into depth about the last two. Alright, first up is trading Pokemon. This was one of the main sellouts of the game. Each version had at least 11 Pokemon that could only be found in that game, and since there's only one save file, means that you have to have a friend with the other version. Unless you're like me, you had 2 Game Boys, Red and Blue, and, well, traded with yourself. When you trade with a friend though, that Pokemon gets a 50% experience boost. But Game Freak was smart, you can't just trade in a level 100 Pokemon with only one badge. He won't listen to you. That's why certain badges allow a certain obedience cap. Now next up are Technical Machines, or TMs. Now this is a really cool feature of Pokemon, which lets you manually teach a skill to any of your monsters. You can find these on the ground, get them from gyms, or an old man who just doesn't know what the heck to do with it. But be careful, these can only be used once, so you have to choose wisely who you're going to give it to. However, there are 5 special moves in the game called Hidden Machines, which can be taught over and over again, but can't be removed without help later in the game. Negatives aside though, these allow you to reach new places on the overworld, which just begs for exploration. But come on, you didn't think your journey would just be smooth sailing, right? You run into criminal masterminds known as Team Rocket, which want to steal and sell Pokemon for money. You run into their many schemes as you progress in the game, such as the underground game corner base and the takeover of Silphco and Saffron. Now these guys were pretty bad at being villains, which is why I think it's hilarious that their boss, Giovanni, is actually really dark and serious. Personally, I think it's the difference that makes them memorable as a whole. So let's fast forward 30 hours. You've beaten all 8 gym leaders, defeated a criminal organization all by yourself at the age of 10, and caught a bunch of monsters. So what happens next? You go to the Pokemon League, where the Elite Four, the best trainers in the world, sit around and do nothing waiting for the next challenger. Must be a pretty nice job, huh? Now these guys were obviously inspired by Final Fantasy. Those games usually have 4 big boss fights in a row, followed by the final boss, which I said before is your rival. Great fitting ending, right? Not to mention the music in this is downright classic. After the battle, the credits roll, and all that's left to do is catch 'em all. Whew! Now that we've overviewed the whole game, how did the game sell when it came out over 15 years ago in Japan? Well, to be honest, it only had modest sales when it was released, which must have been really scary because Game Freak almost went bankrupt making this game. Satoshi worked many unpaid hours, and 5 people actually quit before the game was released. But there was one Pokemon that sparked the sales of these games. Nope, wasn't Pikachu, wasn't any of the starters. It was Mew. That's right. So if you didn't know already, Mew started off as an inside prank at Game Freak, where they'd have a Pokemon that was only obtainable by the staff. But Mew was added after the game's debugging was done, and little did they know Mew was obtainable through a glitch in the game. So Satoshi had the awesome idea to put Mew in a magazine called Koro Koro, where readers got a trading card of the creature for free. After the success of the possible secret Pokemon to use, Game Freak made a giveaway where 151 contestants got Mew in their games. Now this spiked sales, creating little myths and fake rumors about the game that made the game very highly discussed and played. And that, my friends, sparked a major franchise in Nintendo. But it wasn't just the major hype that made the game a classic, it was the sentimental value that you got while playing the game itself. The first one is your team. Each playthrough of the game is never the same, and you decide which Pokemon you want to use the most. Even if you choose the same Pokemon, each Pokemon grows up differently depending on the enemies you defeat. You can also add little rules that increase the difficulty of the game, such as the infamous Nuzlocke challenge, where you consider a Pokemon dead when it faints, and you gotta release them. Now second up are the side quests. There are caves in the game where legendary Pokemon dwell, the game corner I talked about earlier, a safari zone where you can catch Pokemon using only rocks and bait, and little fetch quests, such as getting awesome fossilized Pokemon, giving a girl drinks for TMs, and talking to an old man about his Rapidash and he gives you a bike voucher for listening to his crap. And last but not least, surprisingly, are the glitches. Sure, every game may have a glitch or two, but Pokemon Red and Blue had some that were really memorable. For instance, most people have heard of a glitch called Missing Number, a glitch Pokemon caused by a programming fault. Now I'm no genius at programming, but it happens when you talk to the old man in Viridian City. This tutorial battle causes the player's name to change to Old Man, but the problem is Old Man is saved in the wild Pokemon memory. This usually resets when you enter a new route, but the problem is if you fly to and surf along the coast of Cinnabar Island, you're still technically in a town. So this data never gets reset, and you technically face the old man in battle, which results in a glitched pixely L thing. Yeah, this dude may mess with your game in hilarious ways, and sometimes can get you infinite items, but it's the rumors and the discussion that made it actually mean something. Not to mention you, who I talked about earlier, is available through a glitch as well. Who would have guessed it would have this kind of effect on the game? Now, next up are the faults. I know this game may be incredible and revolutionary, but no game is perfect, right? I know some people will get butthurt over the reasons I give, but they really have to be mentioned. Now, first up are the sprites. Even though the enemy sprite looks really nice, what the heck happened to your sprite? You look like a garbled mess of pixels, and seeing that this game was made in 1998 on Game Boy, that's just unacceptable. Now, second off are the repetitive battles. I have no problem facing the same Pokemon over and over again, but most of these battles just require mashing A. You don't even have to look at the screen. This sometimes makes the game kind of boring, seeing that in other RPGs you have several characters to use and many moves at your arsenal. And last but not least are the speed of the battles. Now this may sound really nitpicky at first, but in most RPGs, damage is done instantaneously, while in this game it's used with a health bar, and it takes several seconds to get that health bar going down. Now this problem may have been solved in Pokemon Black and White, but in this game it makes the repetitive battles even more repetitive because you have to wait for that health bar to dwindle down to nothing. Really could have shed a couple hours on your playtime. Alright, well let's get on to the review. Fun. Now this game is tons of fun to play, and it's a very revolutionary style of play, but the problem is some of the battles just get way too repetitive, so because of that, 9. Now looks-wise, this is a very clean game to look at, and the enemy sprites look awesome, but the problem is your sprite looks like a pixely mess, so because of that, 8. Now sound-wise, this has to be some of the best 8-bit soundtracks I've ever heard in a video game. They're all classic and they all belong on your iPod immediately. And the screeches for Pokemon, even though they sound archaic, are a very nice touch nonetheless. 10. Now lengthwise, you're getting a 30-hour quest, over 150 Pokemon to catch, and a bunch of side quests to do, and you're just gonna have tons of fun playing this RPG. You couldn't ask for any more. 10. Now difficulty-wise, I'm gonna give this to a low-medium. Only because this game can be a bit harder in the later parts of the game, but it's still very fun and very accessible for anyone. So I'm gonna give this game a 9 out of 10. Even though it has very minor faults, it's a great game nonetheless, and everyone should at least give Pokemon a try. But I'm not done yet. 2 years later, Blue version came out, which had little improvements to the game. The game's sprites, engine, and script was used in the other versions of Pokemon Red and Blue, but still used the version-exclusive Pokemon from Red and Green. Then with the success of the anime, they made Pokemon Yellow version, which is a director's cut of these games, with Pikachu following you around, Jessie and James from Team Rocket as villains, and way better Pokemon sprites. Fun fact, Ash and Gary's Japanese names were named after Satoshi, and Miyamoto's first name, Shigeru. But then, Game Freak made a sequel to these games, which went out to be an even more incredible game. But that's a story for another time. Alright, well that concludes my video. Subscribe if you like my stuff, and if you really like this kind of Nintendo 101 segment, be sure to leave a like and a nice comment in the comments. So, be sure to check out the other reviews on my channel, and I'll be back very soon with more videos. So, this is Balrog signing out, and I'll see you guys very soon. Well, hopefully.